In this interview, I'm going to be talking to Kari Hyde, who is the manager, utility integration and demand side management at Pembina Institute. And we're going to be talking about some recommendations that came out recently from the Alberta's Electricity Future Coalition. So, welcome to the interview, Kari.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Now, we're going to be talking about some technical issues here around the Alberta power grid, and you've worked in it for most of your career. I think we need to establish your bona fides because you know what you've worked here and you will understand this system really well. So give us your background a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. So before coming to Pembina in August of last year, I spent 8 years of my career at the distribution utilities themselves. So I worked for both the rural electricity distribution utility, Fortis Alberta, and I worked for ENMAX, which is a more urban type of utility, both investor owned, both that type of utility on the distribution side. Previous to that, years ago, I worked for Pengbreath Energy. And I was their coordinator and managed a lot of sites. So we electrified, a lot of pump jacks and things like that. But we also put in peaking units in Judy Creek of 15 megawatts each. And we also put in obviously a cogen for our SAGD in Cold Lake. So I worked with utilities on the other side as a customer and was very familiar in the understanding of how generation, transmission, distribution all piece together to the retail side and to the customer, and why it's important when we're making changes to really understand that those changes should occur across the system holistically.
Right. And and we should make clear here that this is about the distribution system. It's not about generation.
Right.
It's not about transmission. It's that last mile into the house or to the business. And I
Correct.
want to start off at kind of a global level, Kari, because this is where we come in. We are not here at Energy Media. We're journalists. We're not experts in power grids. But what we do is we interview experts all around the world about issues like this. And then from those observations of how things are done differently elsewhere, then we can say, well, how does this apply to Alberta? And one of the things that I have found over the last 5 years is that the grid, the old centralized grid, where you had a thermal generator like coal or gas, and then this hub and spoke model for getting it out to the customers is rapidly changing in other parts of the world, parts of the US, Europe, Asia for sure. And and part of it is because of all of this technology we've got. I mean, the technology that's come along in the last 5, 10 years is just amazing. And we need a different grid. You need the lingo is modernize the grid. And how would you, given the fact that you've worked with the power grid in one way or another in Alberta for a long time, how would you characterize or describe the Alberta's attitude towards this grid and need to modernize?
So I think it depends on who you talk to, but I would suggest, for a long time our grid worked really, really well. And I think it was really easy to state, keep costs down, make sure it's affordable, make sure it's reliable. But now we have people that are putting solar on rooftops and communities that are doing that and indigenous nations. Now we have to open up the grid to the fact that if we just keep adding generation to the system, we are going to have to keep building infrastructure. And there's other things that are required in order to support. If you're going to electrify everything to get to net zero, you're going to have to support the thought of using less energy and finding more and better ways to optimize the energy we're using on that system. So you're not just building infrastructure year over year. I would say that is starting to become fundamental in Alberta, regardless of where you sit, that there's got to be another way to do this besides just building infrastructure.
Yeah, I would say that's a given pretty much everywhere. And you see it particularly in places like Texas and California. You see it in the UK
Mhm.
and in some of the Asian countries where it's not just like utility scale solar and wind. Like for instance, if you we're seeing now a lot of say factories. Like I interviewed a fellow down in Costa Rica, And what he does is he takes solar batteries and control systems, and he goes to various manufacturing industries like ice cream, and he says to them, "I will build you a system that makes you independent of the grid. So you can be
Microgrid.
connected to the grid, but you're independent. If there's an outage on the grid, you're not affected. Your costs are lower. You have a more resilient system. It can grow with you." And we see that at the residential level, multifamily, we're seeing it more and more at the commercial level, which I think is going to be a big, big driver of change in the next 5 to 10 years. And we're just at seeing the tip of the iceberg here in Alberta, aren't we?
Absolutely. So the way that utilities are incentivized here, distribution utilities in Alberta, they are incentivized for throughput. So how much energy they put through the system on a price cap basis. So that's what their rates pay for. So it's a capitally intensive business, and they get paid to invest in this infrastructure. Now, our thinking and most people's thinking is, well, we can't just build infrastructure, as I spoke to a minute ago. And what that means is we should have programs like demand side management programs, which have been in place in every other jurisdiction outside of Alberta for years and years. And generally, it's utilities that invest in those. Alberta doesn't have a regulatory framework that supports that, or a policy to actually ask the regulator to put together a framework that supports that. So we're missing that critical piece. That's what we are speaking to a little bit in the changes that we want on the distribution system. Is first and foremost, we have to incorporate demand side management. DSM is energy efficiency, which everybody knows, meaning using less energy to get the same results. Demand response programs, which, you could think of your EV charging programs as kind of a demand response, like charge here and not here, charge when we have plentiful power on the grid and not when, everybody's rushing home from work to make dinner. And then the last mile is really that distributed energy resource aggregation for things like virtual power plants or microgrid, yes or no. You can still, generally, I speak to VPP, which is more grid connected, and offering ancillary services back to the distribution level the same way we do on the transmission side.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of opportunities here. I mean, last year I interviewed a company in Calgary, it was a startup, and they were basically creating a virtual power plant in Calgary using residential solar on rooftops. And what they would do is they would say, okay, we will come in, we will pay for your solar panels, pay for the installation, the inverters, all the other equipment that's required. And then we will manage that and we'll provide services to the grid that demand they have a higher value than just selling electricity, so much per
Right.
kilowatt hour. And then out of all of that, we'll pay off the equipment, we'll pay us, and you will save, 15, 20%, whatever the number is. And that in Calgary, that's a huge innovation. And yet that sort of thing has been going on now for, 5 years in California. And it happens in industrial parks, it happens in residential areas, apartment buildings, condo complexes, all of that kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
we're really kind of in the 5 to 10 years behind the sort of the innovators and the movers and shakers in this industry.
Yeah, I would say for sure, probably 5 years in terms of demand side management programming in general. We're 20 years behind in certain areas. What's nice about where Alberta is today, though, is they can look at the mistakes that other jurisdictions have done over these years in understanding how to incorporate DER aggregation appropriately. Where on the grid do you need to do this? How do you set up proper procurement procedures and processes? How do you ensure that people are getting paid for the value stack of energy systems they're bringing to the system? For instance, are you supporting the fact that renewable resources such as solar are cleaner? And so should there be like a value proposition that adds value to that? And are you supporting those other types of, like this should be a technology agnostic sort of business model where people who have, fossil fuel backgrounds can say, well, I can ramp up or ramp down really easily. Or somebody who has solar and storage can do the same thing. You should be looking at the value stack of opportunities that can be provided to your grid in order to optimize that system to the best of its ability and also offer that revenue stream back to the customer for doing so. The problem is the regulatory structure that we have in place today does not support that. So even if you have a solar utility or another type of VPP provider out there, they're very limited in what they can do because we don't have all the AMI metering rolled out yet. So that automated metering, the 2.0 version that does 5-minute and 15-minute interval readings that can give you real-time data back and forth information. And we also don't have the technology platforms to support. So distributed energy resource management centers, data analytics, all of those things have to be opened up. And that's also spoken to through the EFL's work is the need for that data.
Yeah, in the last even a couple of weeks, I've interviewed a number of entrepreneurs who are working in the U.S. who with AI solutions. And the ability to either collect data from sensors within the grid
Mhm.
or to use software to and get the data from elsewhere, like if, for instance, weather effects on transmission lines. But the ability to integrate AI into the grid and the ability to collect and use the data that the system is generating makes it's a fundamental part of power grid management, at least modern power grid management. And we're again slow off the mark here.
Absolutely does. So the fundamentals are you need that baseline layer of technology pieces to support. Without it, you can do energy efficiency programs. They've been done long before AMI programs. So I would suggest to anyone who's doing this, you got to walk before you run. So you would start implementation of energy efficiency demand response programs that don't require. And then when AMI comes on stream, which should be by the end of 2029, the rest of them, unless they can ramp that up a little bit faster, you can start looking at things like local grid market mechanisms and things to support DER aggregation appropriately. But you have to walk before you run. So in Alberta, we're going to have to start where everybody else has already been, and that's in demand side management programs and teaching that behavioral change to people that when and how you use energy matters to the grid, matters to costs, and there should be a way for them to make that connection because today it's not there.
Right. And one of the things that's a big trend, and it's funny, I just came up, I had a CBC interview and we were talking about how the energy conversation in Alberta needs to change. And my point was that when you get outside North America, the electrification of economies is front and center. And it's both on the supply side, so lots of wind and solar, but also nuclear and hydro and geothermal. There's all sorts of whatever you can get that provides you with low cost, reliable, clean electricity. That's supply side. Then on the demand side, countries are deliberately electrifying their transportation sectors, their
Yeah,
their building sectors with heat pumps, their industrial processes with electric arc furnaces and so on. And the race is on to electrify. And the EFL, or sorry,
Energy Futures
the
Lab,
Futures Lab.
Alberta's
Thank you.
electricity Future.
I,
Yeah.
I know that well. I just yes. So the EFL's recommendations here that make it's urgency. We
Mhm.
can't fall too far behind the global economy in this trend because then you become uncompetitive. And
Absolutely.
that's got to be a big concern, right?
Yeah, competitiveness, especially in the age of Trump and the fact that the US is kind of reverting to being a difficult trading partner, something we've never had to deal with. If you want to open up trade across the UK and across the EU, there are carbon border adjustment mechanisms coming into play in 2026 and 2027. Initially they'll be focused on like fertilizer and steel and cement and industries that are very, very high carbon intensity. But by 2027, they're looking at scope 2 emissions, which is indirect emissions caused by electricity on non-clean fossil fuel grids and how that impacts. So absolutely, we're late to the party. And if we want to continue to be a competitive province, which, this government's biggest thing is value creation and job opportunities and open competitiveness. They're very big on that. So they should love this idea of a local grid market mechanism of choice, giving customers choice to become part of the system if they choose to. I think that we just have to have these conversations differently about what the value is, because it's not just about being clean or net zero or those things that can sometimes become buzzwords. It's about that competitive nature.
Boy, you know what? You're preaching to the choir here, Carrie, because we often say here at Energy Media, the power grid, the electricity system, is the foundation of the 21st century economy.
Yeah,
And if you don't have it, you are going. Now, we started saying that, years ago, and it's becoming it's a reality today, and it's what's happening in the background. And the EFL report and the recommendations are great, and there needs, we've talked about some of the issues and where the sticking points are, but even before that, I think it's the conversation around electricity, the conversation around the grid, the conversation around energy, and how that gets used by the economy, what you make, what the all of that. This is a really an economic and competitive argument, as you just mentioned.
absolutely. It is the backbone of industry. It's the backbone and the lifeblood of how we create things and make money and remain a competitive province. It absolutely is. And I would say that the distribution side has the biggest opportunity here because there's always been the ability for centralized generation, for larger generators to come on and to provide ancillary services to that side. What we're talking about is regular building owners should be able to have these same revenue streams. And so should, indigenous communities. So should, if you put five solar batteries, solar panels on five different schools within a community, add battery backup storage, you could almost run that community. It really does make sense for them to be able to have another way to generate revenue and also provide value back to the grid so that they don't have to build as much. Again, that very capitally intensive business needs to change, but that can only happen with regulation.
And the irony here is that last spring, the Alberta government passed, well, I guess the legislature passed, but it was a government bill, uh, Bill 22, which now enables self-generation for industrial and big commercial operations. So let's say that you're, again, one of the factories, or you're, an industrial park. And so you want, somebody comes in and says, I'm going to build you a microgrid. And so we're going to put in the solar panels, we're going to put in all the storage we need, and then we're going to have the controls so that we can be, we're plugged into the grid in real time. And then what happens, or can happen, is that not as much strain on the grid. The government made that very clear. That was part of its objective. But then you can feed in electricity back in. Do you need to help control voltage? Do you need to help control frequency? Do you need to help control, maybe there's a peak, around supper time when everybody's cooking dinner, whatever it is. Those batteries in those five schools you talked about can earn high value revenue by providing services that previously were provided else by other means. And that sort of model and argument, even though we brought in the legislation, still is not part of the conversation.
So my understanding is Bill 22 changed to Bill 86, and they left out a very critical piece, and it was non-wire solutions.
Oh
And
dear.
because non-wire solutions was omitted, it did end up becoming a transmission play instead of a distribution play. And that is
Oh,
why. So on the distribution side, we talk about anything greater than 25 megawatts can definitely do that. The government of Alberta, or the AUC, actually, the Alberta Utilities Commission, determined that anything under 25 megawatts wasn't really causationally causing any sort of benefit to the grid. So they stopped providing credits back to those type of facility owners. And so that's why we want to say, well, if we're not causing any positivity onto the transmission system, then when we bring in DERs and things like that to do this work, we're not fundamentally causing any shifts the other way either. So when we look at this legislation moving forward, it will be interesting to see how they define that benefit back to the distribution system. Is it as being equal to a transmission type benefit, or is it not?
Oh, that's interesting. I had missed the change to Bill 86 and the and taking out that key part of the legislation. But I can say with some certainty that there are, markets even in the US, where they've changed their regulation because they want to encourage large loads, those factories and commercial operations to be able to either reduce uh, the draw on the grid, the stress on the grid,
Hmm.
and also then provide those services. And you look at Texas, a report came out today. I haven't had a look at it yet, but the argument of the report is that storage and the ability to for those companies to feed electricity back into the grid has basically stabilized ERCOT and made a huge difference in the flexibility, resilience, and reliability and cost of electricity.
Absolutely. Again, Texas is a really good example of transmission side, though. They do not have local distribution size connected DER. And that's more what I think we're talking about in terms of opening up the local side of the system. So they have this
Gotcha.
similar benefits. So if you look at New York's model, for example, they have both um, DER aggregation models on the transmission side or the bulk system. And they also have them on the local side. As low as 10 kilowatts can be aggregated to provide value back to the grid. And that's what we're talking about here. You're not going to look at one household with one solar panel. You're going to need to aggregate those resources together through VPP or other aggregation models. But everybody should be able to have the right to choose how and when to use electricity and to also provide a value stream back to the grid if they want to.
Well, Kari, thank you very much for this. This is our first interview with you. It's been very enlightening, and all the stuff we talked about is not just a nice to have; it's a need to have,
It
and as
is.
quickly as possible. So we're going to have more of these conversations, you and I. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.